The Eagles changed up their coaching staff and added to an already packed secondary over the weekend, but that hasn't stopped one former All-Pro from claiming he wants to sign with the Birds. Plus, how big of a deal was Jalen Hurts' unenthusiastic comments about his head coach over the weekend, and who were the top standouts from a very busy few days during Eagles Minicamp? I'm Thomas Mott. This is the Thomas Mott Show. The Eagles made some moves both on and off the field over the weekend following the final minicamp practice of the week, including signing a cornerback and promoting Eagles legend Big Dom. And when it comes to the latter, the beloved Dom Disandro was previously the senior advisor to the GM and chief security officer. But now they've added senior advisor to game day coaching operations as another new title for Dom, who is now the senior advisor to general manager, chief of security, game day coaching operations, which, according to reports, will give him new responsibilities, including overseeing head coach Nick Sirianni's assistants on game day. The new title will also make it more difficult for the NFL to discipline him if there's another sideline dust-up in the future. Now, I have no clue what exactly this means, what exactly Dom does on a day-to-day basis, but I think the latter part of that entire little article basically stating it makes it harder for the NFL to get rid of him or suspend him is probably the main point. And it seems like the Eagles really do think Big Dom is an integral part of the coaching staff and the team as a whole, and he definitely helps in ways that we fans can't really imagine. I mean, it was after Big Dom's ejection that the Birds spiraled out of control last year, which resulted in Eagles insider Derek Gunn noting that Big Dom, suspended, controls Sirianni's emotions on the sideline. In his absence, Nick got in numerous arguments with players and coaches during games. While I still find it really hard to believe that Big Dom is that important to Nick Sirianni being a coach, Birds' record with both Sirianni and Big Dom on the sideline, well, it's way better than it was when it was just Sirianni there. If Dom really is the glue, as weird as that is, then the promotion definitely sounds like a no-brainer. Now, speaking of Dom's role and what he does, I did find this clip of Darius Slay on a podcast this week, basically explaining that Big Dom was the reason he didn't become a Raven, at least pretty interesting.
At the end of the day, for sure, I almost was a Baltimore Raven, though. I really committed to the Ravens and was finna go. Then Dom called me and said, Slay, I want you here, da-da-da. And I'm like, you know what, Dom? If you calling me, Dom, I'm coming back.
Now, Darius Slay and a bunch of other Eagles will, of course, be at Devontae Smith's celebrity softball game at the end of the month. Myself and Josh Davis, though, we're teaming up to do another giveaway this week. This time, it's a meet and greet with a photo with none other than Devontae Smith. Now, to enter, very simple. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel. You always have to be subscribed. Sub to Josh's channel as well, linked in the description box, and then comment Smitty down below in the comment section of this video. The winner, well, we'll select it later on this week. And when it comes to Eagles actually leaving the football team, Pro Football Talk has a fascinating article today on Hassan Reddick's continued absence and really discontent on his new team with the New York Jets. Reddick apparently has not shown up for any OTA practices and doesn't seem to be showing up this coming week when the Jets hit the field for their mandatory minicamp. Reddick, of course, will be fined if he's not there. And despite wanting a new contract, the Jets, again, don't seem to want to give him one, which is the reason he's obviously unhappy. All of this gives us great hindsight into the Eagles making a strong and really smart decision with Hassan Reddick. We all wanted them to re-sign him, but clearly he wanted so much money that Howie Roseman said, hey, we don't want to give you this money, but you're also not going to play under your current contract, so have fun being a Jet. The Jets' big problem was trading for a guy without getting him a contract and thinking he would just play on the contract he didn't want with the Philadelphia Eagles. Not a good look by the Jets, but overall I think a smart move by Philadelphia. Now, the other move the Eagles made over the weekend was the signing of former Dolphins cornerback Parry Nickerson, who, if you don't recognize the name, was one of 4 players trying out for the Eagles during minicamp and does have history on Fangio's 2023 Dolphins defense. Now, he is 30 years old and very clearly a depth guy, most likely at nickel, making the Birds now have, 15 cornerbacks on their roster. I think he's going to have a hard time making the team, but a signing is a signing. This signing, though, leaves the idea of signing former NFL star cornerback Chris Harris Jr., who told Kay Adams on Friday that he wants to come out of retirement to play for the Birds, not as thrilling of a news story as it would be a couple of years ago.
Oh, man. Definitely I could go play with the Eagles. You know, they already have a veteran secondary. You know, I know Fangio's system. You know, I can learn it really fast, and if he's added anything new, and then, you know, having veteran corners. So I definitely think I could go up there and fit with those guys. Also, if they need some nickel work, go in there and play some nickel work. But I think that would be a good fit.
Chris Harris was like a top 5 cornerback in the entire league when he was really during his prime with the Denver Broncos, but he moved around multiple teams in 2022 and then tried last year just to sign with the winner at 33 years old, but nobody ended up giving him a call. And now that he's 34 years old, I mean, I get the idea of maybe bringing him in because he could mentor the young secondary, but if Philadelphia hadn't gone out and signed all these brand new players and are trying desperately to give Ringo and Rodgers and Cooper Dejean and Quinyon Mitchell as many reps as possible, then sure, signing Chris Harris Jr. makes sense. But at this point in the Eagles Eagles offseason, adding a 16th corner to this depth chart, it just doesn't make sense for someone who's 34 years old. I think one of the most talked about stories the past couple of days has to be Jalen Hurts trying to figure out Kellen Moore's offense, and also Nick Sirianni not getting the best defense from his QB1. Like, we know that Jalen Hurts wasn't necessarily fantastic during the OTA and minicamp period, but he did say it's a 95% offensive difference from what you saw with Brian Johnson this past year. But really, it was Hurts' comments, or lack thereof, when asked about Nick Sirianni that has people all fired up.
I mean, it's a great question. I don't know that I know the answer to it.
What have you seen? What have you seen from him as far as doing that?
I think he's just, he's been great, and the messages he's delivering to the team. He's trying to be very intentional in what he's saying, and yeah.
Now, I decided to speak to somebody who was actually at the Eagles minicamp and also in the interview room when Jalen Hurts had his controversial, not really comments, but Brandon Lee Gowton, managing editor of Bleeding Green Nation, he came on to give us full details on his thoughts on the Hurts, Kellen Moore, and Nick Sirianni situation, but also a lot of other news and notes from what was a very, very fun minicamp the past couple of days. It's hard to break down the overall look of Kellen Moore's offense. We've talked about it the past couple of shows you and I have done together here on my channel, because they don't have pads on and it's very new and they're trying to figure things out. I do want your overall opinion on the Kellen Moore offense in terms of how different it's going to look. Jalen Hurts said just a couple of days ago during his final press conference, it's 95% different. Do you buy that whole idea that we're going to see an Eagle offense we're not used to from the past couple of years?
Yeah, as you said, no pads. Also, the amount of 11-on-11 work was pretty limited that we saw in the spring practices. But I mean, for Jalen Hurts to say that, he's not a guy who doesn't speak intentionally. Sorry for the double negative, but the point is that he does speak very intentionally, and I think we saw some, adjustment period for the offense here throughout spring in terms of the defense has kind of looked ahead of the offense. And that's okay. There's a lot of time left in the offseason as players are adjusting to a new scheme. That is, I think, an amount higher than any of us really would have expected, in part because, Nick Sirianni previously was talking about how, this is going to be a marriage of what the Eagles were doing and what Kellen Moore brings to the table. It sounded more, something of a closer to a 50-50. But when you have Jalen Hurts saying 95%, that's a stark amount.
I did a show yesterday kind of diving into winners and losers from training camp, and I kind of settled on this whole idea of the Jalen Hurts comments on Nick Sirianni from Thursday were just a little bit interesting to me. And like you just said, Jalen Hurts never just says things to say things. He's very intentional. And he was asked a question. You were at the press conference. You probably remember this exact moment where it's like, hey, what's the difference between Sirianni last year, Sirianni this year? The reporter very clearly trying to kind of, what's Nick Sirianni doing? And Jalen didn't really have an answer. He's like, what was your thoughts on that moment and the overall, I think, aura around Nick Sirianni coming off of the bad year in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, it is sometimes with Jalen Hurts, there's like needlessly cagey attitude. For example, another question Jalen has asked about what he's going to be doing during the break, and he said like non-football things. When you can probably be like, hey, maybe I'm going to go golf, or I'm going to sure I'm going to work out and everything, but I'm going to go to the beach. I'm going to that's okay to say. No one's going to judge him for saying that. It's okay to kind of show the humanity that you have. And but that's just not how Jalen Hurts is wired there. I think sometimes he's needlessly cagey and needlessly defensive against the media. So I think there's an element of that. But it's weird because I think in part a question like that gives him an opportunity to just say something nice about Nick Sirianni. He doesn't have to necessarily even fully believe it, but it's just a good opportunity to be like, yeah, Nick is doing a good job of really looking at things from a bigger perspective, or whatever. There's a lot of different ways you can go, I feel like, to answer that question that are pretty not noteworthy and just like, okay, yeah, sure, pretty easy to just keep it moving to the next question. But when you do something like that, it kind of just raises questions like, well, why didn't he just say the easy thing, and why did he say that instead?
Do you view Nick Sirianni as a lame duck head coach this year? I've seen that on Twitter a bunch. Is it as cut and dry as that?
I don't That's a good question. I don't think it's lame duck because, I think he has a big opportunity, and with how much the Eagles have won previously with him, to position himself well. If the Eagles, have another great season this year, I think that would go a long way for him. But I think he's certainly facing a ton of pressure, and I think Jeffrey Lurie was pretty candid about that when asked about Nick Sirianni at the owners' meetings this year, and just the reality of the situation. For them to really have considered moving on from Sirianni. Ultimately, they did not, but based on the reporting that's out there, they gave it legitimate thought. They talked to gauged Bill Belichick's interest level at some point in time. They brought in a defensive coordinator who has head coaching experience. They brought in an offensive coordinator who they interviewed before they hired Nick Sirianni. So certainly the signs are there, that there's a ton of pressure here. But I think Sirianni has a chance to really set himself up well if the Eagles are great this year. But there's also a lot of potential for him to this is his final year if he doesn't get it done.
I think I've mentioned this every single time you and I have talked, but every single show that I've done the past couple of weeks, people are fascinated by how does this player look? How does this player look? And we always kind of go back to the whole idea of no pads, only so many 11-on-11s, so many 7-on-7s, and you're actually there. But I wanted to give you a couple of names that people in my comment section have been dying to hear about that we haven't, at least I haven't seen on Twitter, and just see if you noticed anything from practice. If you didn't, either way, here's a couple of them. One, Eli Ricks. Everybody loves the undrafted free agent from Alabama. It's like Eli Ricks is this steal of a cornerback last year. He's filling in the nickel. He looks good. And then suddenly the entire past couple of weeks have been every other cornerback not named Eli Ricks. Anything stand out about Eli Ricks to you?
I've only noticed him when he struggled, honestly. So not the best spring for Eli Ricks. And by, contrast, a lot of the other cornerbacks have been looking good and stepping up, such as Isaiah Rodgers, Keely Ringo, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. So, I would say kind of stock down on Eli Ricks.
Excuse me. Another name has to be Jalen Hunt. Again, rookies to me for OTAs, it's kind of hard to be like, he looks great, he looks bad, because they're rookies and they're trying to figure things out. But we saw very little footage of Jalen Hunt, very little conversations to the coaches about Jalen Hunt. Anything stand out to you about the third-round draft pick?
I did see a rep, I believe it was on Wednesday, where unless just Fred Johnson slipped, which is possible, so I'm not seeing replay here, and there's a lot of things to look at. But I did see Fred Johnson go down. He was lining up at left tackle, and Jalen Hunt was there lining up against him. So it's possible that Jalen Hunt bowled over Fred Johnson, which would be a nice sign, certainly from the rookie. Otherwise, didn't notice him a ton. He looked fluid in coverage when I saw him drop, but I don't know if they really threw his way. And there were some reps there, as a pass rusher, where I think you can see he needs work and wasn't really much of a challenge to the tackles, but that is to be expected at this point in time.
What about Kenny Gainwell? I saw a little bit on Will Shipley. I saw a bunch on Saquon Barkley. Gainwell is the lone experienced running back basically still on this roster, and he's battling for his life for RB2, in my opinion. Anything up or down from Kenny Gainwell the past couple of days?
Yeah, I don't think the coaching staff has changed their opinion. I think they like him a lot. He did have a couple drops the past 2 days, but I don't think that's needle moving for them. I will say Will Shipley did not have a great start, to OTAs, but then had a really big day in practice the other day in minicamp and was active as a pass catcher. So, that is something to monitor. And if his stock continues to rise, that obviously impacts Kenny Gainwell potentially in his outlook. But yeah, we have, with the running backs as a whole, didn't see, there's only so much to see when they're not even running the ball, and they're not necessarily the biggest targets in this passing attack either. So limited sample size.
Reed Blankenship had an interception of Jalen Hurts the past couple of days. That got a lot of praise, but overall, again, the focus was on Gardner Johnson and on Ringo and on Rodgers and the rest of the young safeties and secondary players out there. Do you view, again, just from OTAs, do you view Blankenship as a guarantee starting safety week one, or do you think he's kind of trying to hold his own and maintain that starting safety spot alongside Gardner Johnson?
No, I think he's a guaranteed starter week one. I think people are a little too down on Reed Blankenship after last year. I get it. There were some struggles there, and not to excuse him, but literally the entire defense was struggling at some point, especially late in the year last year. And I kind of think it was Reed Blankenship getting banged up with multiple injuries earlier in the year that kind of slowed him down after that. And that is certainly a valid concern. Can he stay healthy, not just in terms of being able to play, but being able to play really effectively? So I will allow that. That is something to monitor. That's a fair criticism. But when he's healthy, I mean, he makes plays on the ball. He's such a smart player. I mean, that's a guy you want out there on the field. He knows what's going on conceptually. Part of the, playing the safety position is being able to see things and having figured out above the shoulders there. And I certainly think Reed Blankenship has that. That showed up again in spring practices. He pops. He makes plays on the ball. He knows where to be. And I think he's a really good player. And I know the Eagles also like CJ a lot. Sidney Brown has not been able to practice yet, but I'm sure he'll be back at some point, maybe in training camp. But I just think Reed Blankenship is too good to not be on the field.
I want to ask you quickly about James Bradberry when we finish up on overall the secondary outlook here. You took a couple of pictures of him. I saw on your Twitter account during the coverage the past 2 open practices during minicamp where he's there. He's standing on the sideline. I think it was Jeff McClain who said it was an oblique injury. Any more rumblings about James Bradberry while you were actually at the Novacare complex the past couple of days?
If I'm not mistaken, we talked about James Bradberry potentially, what would happen with him in minicamp showing up or not. And I think, the expectation on my end was that he was going to show up and then not really practice at all due to like some kind of fake injury. And then sure enough, in the first practice, he goes down like 2 or 3 minutes into practice. And again, look, I don't want to say that his injury is totally fake.
Sure.
I want to be respectful to him and everything, but it's just raised my conspiracy alarm a little bit here when that's kind of what I thought was going to happen. And he ends up missing all of mandatory minicamp, doesn't have to practice. So, it was kind of interesting to me, especially with the comments about moving the safety too. I mean, even if like he was healthy and is he going to be on this roster as a backup safety? He's not going to be a starter with all the other talent there. They could use more depth at safety, but I don't think James Bradberry is the option there. I don't think that's how you're going to go about that, especially when there's still some good safeties out there on the free agent market. So I still expect the Eagles to kind of hold on to him to see if they could trade him at some point. And if not, then I think they'll just bite the bullet and save the roster spot at some point down the road.
Yeah, I totally agree. And obviously, you got to respect anyone who has an injury. Maybe he did actually hurt the oblique on the first, like you said, 2 or 3 minutes of practice. But you just start kind of connecting dots, and it's like, okay, he's going to play safety now, but he's not going to start. But they owe him a lot of money, and he always didn't want to be there. But it's mandatory. It's just like, I don't know. Speculation is what we do during the offseason, and so we got plenty of time to do that. It was just very strange from James Bradberry's perspective. I want to ask about a couple of specific plays the past couple of days because those really get highlighted on Twitter in terms of reporters being able to watch 11 on 11s, you obviously being one of them. I want to get in on this whole Cooper Dejean almost one-handed interception. Can you walk us through that one of Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, it seemed like there was some kind of communication thing there with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson telling Cooper Dejean, kind of giving him some advice and like telling him to look out for that and be ready for that at some level, because after Cooper Dejean almost made a one-handed interception, kind of hanging out in the flat, I think peeling off his defender a little bit, anticipating where that ball was going to go. And certainly, again, close, but was not able to make the one-handed grab there. After that play, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson came up to him and was like, hey, man, I told you. And even in his press conference on Thursday, Cooper Dejean said he owed CJ So I'm guessing, there was some kind of thing there where he got a tip from CJ and was able to almost make the play on the ball there. But certainly encouraging sign from a rookie. Cooper Dejean also had a pass breakup on Thursday where he just punched the ball out of the receiver's control. Would have been a fumble, if he had established possession. So good to see Dejean making some plays.
Now, another one of your tweets in terms of plays was a Johnny Wilson deep ball. I believe it was Kenny Pickett. Might have been Tanner McKee. We didn't hear a lot about Johnny Wilson early on during minicamp, much like Will Shipley. I felt like he was getting a little more traction later on. Did you agree with that?
Yeah, Johnny Wilson made that big catch down the left sideline and double move from him. And Isaiah Rodgers had pretty good coverage. Isaiah Rodgers has been great throughout these spring practices, but one of the things about Isaiah Rodgers is he's only 5'10", and Johnny Wilson is 6'6". So Kenny Pickett was able to put that ball high, and Johnny Wilson, who isn't just big but can also run a bit, had a step, just enough room to be behind Isaiah Rodgers there, and the ball went out right in front of Isaiah, or right over Isaiah Rodgers' outstretched hands for the catch, 35-yard touchdown. So a really impressive play by Johnny Wilson. I thought that was a good example of how he could use his size. By contrast, there was a red zone rep earlier where he was around the goal line, and undrafted rookie free agent safety Andre Sam broke up a pass to him where I felt like, that's a kind of a 50-50 ball. You want Johnny Wilson, a guy who's big, to kind of use his frame there and like almost like basketball, kind of box out the defender and make that catch. So that was somewhere, like where didn't see that, but then later in practice, he makes that big play downfield. And I think that's what Johnny Wilson can potentially be for this offense. Is not, a volume target by any means, but a guy who might be able to make a big play or two down the field.
There was one other play that got highlighted to me on Twitter, and it was a simulated sack because they can't hit anybody, but of Devin White in 11-on-11s versus Jalen Hurts. I wonder if you remember that play, and was it just like a coverage sack basically, or what kind of happened with that one?
No, that was a blitz, and for an offense that struggled to pick up the blitz last year, maybe concerning from that standpoint. But I think also part of it, just Devin White is a really good blitzer, and Devin White, again, a guy who had a good spring, just looked like fast out there and athletic, and certainly that fits the profile and why he was drafted so high once upon a time in coverage. We've seen him stand out, but it was also nice to see him stand out in his blitzing role, which, again, something he's had success with in the past, and specifically against the Eagles as well.
If you had to pick an overall winner from OTAs, and it's hard to do because there's a lot of good, and really there didn't seem like there was that much bad. We talked about it a little bit earlier on, James Bradberry. I think Nakobe Dean coming back from injury, question marks there in terms of is he going to actually beat out Zach Bond for the starting linebacker spot. But if Brandon Lee Gowton had to pick the one OTA minicamp winner of the Eagles spring practices, who would you say it is?
I would go with Isaiah Rodgers. I really like how he moves. The way he breaks on the ball when he's come back to the ball it's different than some of the other cornerbacks on this team. He looks so aggressive on those. He looks quick. He looks like he's poised to make big plays. He obviously had the pick 6 on Jalen Hurts in practice in the spring, and he's put himself in a position where he's certainly not guaranteed to be the week 1 starting quarterback across from Darius Slay, and he's facing fierce competition from Keely Ringo, from Quinyon Mitchell. But I think Isaiah Rodgers did really well, and he's put himself in a position where, coming into minicamp, I think there's more of a question of, is this guy even definitely going to make the roster? I think it's clear that he's going to make a roster, barring some kind of trade or something, and it's just a matter of if he's going to be starting or not. And I think he's done only everything to really help himself, that Johnny Wilson play aside.
We'll flip from that one and kind of end, maybe not on a poor note here. I don't want to pick one player who looked really, really bad. Is there one position group or one area of the Eagles team after watching 5 or 6 open practices the past 3 weeks that give you maybe a little bit more concern than anywhere else on the entire roster?
Well, you mentioned Nakobe Dean, and I think, it wasn't the best spring for him in terms of, I don't know how close he is to 100% healthy. He began OTAs not being able to participate in team drills, but then when he was in there, saw him rotate with the starters a little bit. But then after that, he was mostly working with the second team. So for a guy who has he really needs to step up this year as he goes into year 3, because the Eagles need linebacker help. And, he, in theory, is one of the better options, but I don't know that Vic Fangio necessarily is dying to get him out there on the field based on how much we saw Devin White and Zach Bond work with the first team. So, Nakobe will get an opportunity in training camp to flash and, show he deserves to be out there on the field. The past couple of years, I think Nakobe Dean has been invisible in training camp, so it'd be nice to see that change. But for now, I am not seeing signs that he's going to light it up this summer. So we'll see.
6 weeks. We got 6 weeks until the Eagles are back at an actual practice, or at least reporting at the end of July for the start of training camp. It's going to feel long. It's also going to feel short. Brandon, I appreciate you being kind of the eyes and ears of at least this show, and for thousands of people on Twitter who don't get to actually be at practices. I appreciate you coming on. I hope you enjoy your 6 weeks off, because we obviously are all still working, but 6 weeks off until the actual start of the season.
Yeah, 6 weeks off in terms of a little less busy than usual, but obviously still daily coverage of the Eagles at bleedinggreennation.com.
There you go, Bleeding Green Nation, and follow Brandon on Twitter. I always link his Twitter account down below in the description box. One of the best, if not the best, reporters to follow who covers the Eagles. And Brandon, as always, I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.